Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful.
When you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you're stretching, right, and you're uncomfortable and you're trying some new things, you have to sort of shed the fear of being judged. And that's all ego. That's the things you're afraid to do because you're afraid somebody's going to judge you. That's all ego. So I think the more you start doing things and recognizing the pattern, you can sort of stop yourself, take the pause, say, is this really how I want to act? Who's talking here? What's this about? And sort of check in with yourself.
Well, hey, everybody. We have a treat today for our guest on the Fully Mindful. From corporate America to self-development innovator, Marianne Demello-Smith. Our guest today is creator of the Message in the Middle podcast and book club, a place to explore life's difficult lessons through interviews, self-development, book clubs, self-empowerment, and discovery. Cool, right? And as our guest, Marianne has observed that life is messy. It darts this way and that way, and we don't always have a lot of time for reflection. Sometimes we lose sight of ourselves and we move through life pushing toward the next goal, whether that's career, family, or both. We push and just do the next right thing. The Talking Heads pointed this out a couple of decades ago when they sang, "You may find yourself in another part of the world. You may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. You may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?" And like so many of us, that's what happened with Marianne. But instead of spiraling down the drain, Marianne took the time for quiet reflection and then moved forward step by intentional step into the life she envisioned in that quiet reflection. As a society, we too are at an inflection point where we can decide where we want to go as individuals, and as a society, it's a scary and exciting place to be all at once. Marianne and I talk about this and so much more, and how all of us were forced into that quiet reflection during the pandemic. And even though this looked really different for some and was not terribly quiet at all for some of us, it was a moment of disruption, a forced change that made us all look at ourselves. Why am I here? How did I get here? Where do I want to go? Where is there? What is meaningful to us? So anyway, we talk about balance. We talk about setting intentions and having an intentional life, of giving that gift to ourselves, of getting validation from ourselves and not just relying on the external, how to find courage, how we get over ourselves and our egos and move beyond perfectionism, and how we are all in this big, messy life together. So lean into this intimate conversation for some identification, and I think you'll also find a lot of inspiration. Hey, everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful podcast, and I'm here very happily tonight with Marianne Demello-Smith. She's a fellow podcaster. She also works in corporate America and has served as a coach and mentor and senior leader in that field. And she also has this amazing family, a husband, children, grandchildren. And some point, and you'll find out through her story tonight, that she had a little aha moment, or maybe more than an aha moment, and realized that life's messy. Hence her podcasts, Mess in the Middle, if I've got that right.
Message in the Middle.
Message in the Middle. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We talk about the messes, though.
Right. Talking about the message. And so Message in the Middle, she has a book club as well. And she is kind of a self-development, self-proclaimed in a way, and I think she deserves this, guru in self-development. She knows all the things and is always learning. So welcome, Marianne. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I
Yeah. So, could we talk a little bit about your journey? Like, how did you arrive at the point when we'll get to your aha moment, but kind of tell us a little bit about you and your background and what you were up to in the early years.
ah, the early years. I don't know how far back we want to go, but let me start with sort of what led here, which, like everyone else, it wasn't a fully straight line, right? Awfully curvy, just like everybody else's story. Yeah, you nailed it. I was working in corporate America for the last 25 years, a little over that, running some pretty big teams in financial services industry, sitting between the tech and the business, running and supporting applications. Loved my job, loved the company, worked a gazillion hours, but was really happy to be doing that because I liked it. And then the company got acquired 3 times in a few short years, and suddenly became almost unrecognizable. And I just wasn't in alignment with it anymore. It didn't feel right. It didn't fit. Some of the changes just, weren't lining up with what I wanted and what I needed. So I separated from the company in 2021.
And that's never an easy thing to do, even if it's no longer in alignment, right? For all the
Yeah.
things, all the reasons.
All the reasons. I
It's
had a
messy.
team. Oh, so messy. So messy. I had a team I loved, and I had a whole little universe that I grew from infancy and kind of was my baby. So it was really hard to leave that. And I will be honest and say my priorities were not in check for a lot of years, and work was everything. It was really front and center to my whole life. And so, to your point, that separation was painful. It was painful. But I took 6 months off and I hung out with my granddaughter. I organized my house. I did a lot of the things that you never get time to do. And life just got quiet. And it was in that quiet that I started to really feel the pull. I had also been on a wellness journey for a few years. I lost a significant amount of weight. I was helping do some coaching in that group and was running a book club. And sort of things just started falling into place. And, as I was doing that and that was kind of growing, I started to really remember in the quiet what I loved to do. I went to college for English and journalism. I worked at a travel publication right out of school. And then I got pregnant very early. I was in college still when I got pregnant. And when I found myself out of school, talk about messes, I was single. I had a baby. I just got out of college and I needed a real job. So I got a real job in financial services and I worked my way up the ladder and I created a really great career. But I sort of lost sight of all the things I loved in that time. And it wasn't until this quiet time that I started to remember and I started to feel the pull. And I just started to dabble in some of the things and decided I was going to do the podcast. And lo and behold, sort of led me to where I am now.
Yeah, I want to explore the quiet because so few of us have that opportunity to get that sort of extended period of quiet. But sometimes we can get small little moments of quiet. It sounds like to me, if I'm hearing you right, that you really didn't afford yourself a whole lot of opportunity for quiet while you were in the job that you loved for so long.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was typical, a personality had to do all the things and, lead the pack in all the ways, but lost sight of myself and any self-care, any time for any of that. Yeah. It wasn't until this time that I really had a minute to really even notice that, though. I sort of didn't even know that I wasn't doing that. It didn't really register until I had that time.
Now that you know that it didn't really register until you had the quiet time, what do you think, or have you been able to kind of suss out what that was all about, like what it was that made you forget what your other interests were, how to care for yourself and really treat yourself the way that I'm sure you treat your family members, which is
Mm.
well and with love.
Yeah, I think it's not one thing, right? Life is messy. That's the premise of my whole show.
Mm.
And I think that, it started out as a drive to be self sufficient, to support, to create a safe space for myself and my daughter. It turned into being something I was really good at. And so I think I was still not, I think, I know, I was very driven by external validation and the desire to achieve and, get all the things, do all the things. And I think it just kind of spiraled, really. If I think about it, it sort of just happened. I mean, I know it didn't just happen. Obviously, I had a role in that, but I think it just started like that and then it just continued. And then because I felt really good at what I did and very comfortable in that space, I think I used it as a crutch too, to hide from other things, right? Whenever life got messy, things were going on as life does. We all have ups and downs. And of course, family and just everything. Everything can get messy at any time in your life. I think I went to work instead of doing the work to figure out what needed to be done.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense to me. And so many of us have that experience where I certainly identify with what you're talking about choosing this safe, the quote unquote real job, and then really being motivated by the fact that you did it really well, whether or not it was something that you had ever actually intended to do.
Yeah.
It turned out you did it well. And then societally, culturally, corporate America, especially, you get that kudos. It feels good. And it's designed to do that, to keep you going and going and going. And, it sounds like it went really well for many, many years, but with some cost, right? The cost
Yeah.
of self-care, it sounds like, at least for some time, and the cost of not exploring some of your other interests.
Yeah. I would say those costs, as well as time that I can't get back with my kids, with my family, right? I traveled a lot. And at the time, I enjoyed it. But looking back, do I think I would do it differently? Probably. Probably.
Yeah, I have that same thing where I pivoted toward pursuing a career in law when I too had an English lit degree, and I could have never made it in journalism. I remember trying to get a job at a small, tiny little newspaper in Marin County, California, as like an editor, and they're like, "Go away." It was for like $8 an hour, but I could write. That was something that I could do, and I was passionate about poetry, and I wanted to make movies and all of that. And I had that sort of thought, and actually, I wanted to be a radio show host at one point, and I had that thought. You did too. You did too. And of course, everybody was telling me, and then I was telling myself, well, that's dumb. Like, don't do that. That's not very wise. And so I too pivoted to, and I think so many people do, right? It's the
Yeah.
quote unquote responsible thing to do. And here at Fully Mindful, we're not trying to tell you to just be irresponsible, but there's a balance, right?
Yeah, there's a balance. And I can't stop laughing because I do think, and so many, we now are lucky enough to talk to so many people,
Yeah.
and it is a common theme, right? And especially with women. And I think the one thing that I continue to say to people is, I wish I could just teach women in their 20s or even 30s to be able to recognize what we now know, right? What we now feel like we're getting fully into alignment with, because there is a balance. And I do think you can do both, but I think very often life just kind of sweeps us up and we let it sort of happen to us and take us away, and we're not intentional. And I think that's where we get lost in it.
Do you think post-pandemic, especially, but maybe even prior to the pandemic, Gen Z and maybe even some millennials are kind of figuring that out, maybe in some sort of weird way, but like maybe this is part of why people are struggling going back to work, even though we've been post-pandemic purportedly for a while, and why people are looking at what they want to do with their lives. Seems to me like that's the case. What do you think?
I do. I think it's twofold. So I think you hit on part of it being having to do with the pandemic, because I think it forced a quietness. And some might say, oh, you're crazy because I had kids at home and it was nuts. But still, you maybe weren't in the car commuting every day and you weren't necessary. So life changed in that you could be home for breakfast, you could be home for dinner with the kids. Even if you had to go back to quote unquote work on the computer after that, you had family time. And I think people sort of were forced back into balance, and companies were forced to allow that as well because they knew, I mean, listen, we've never been through a pandemic and people were very flexible. Companies were very flexible. If you needed to take care of your kids because they had homeschooling and you needed to attend to that versus be on all day, they were fine. Make up your time at night, right? There were things that were unheard of that happened. So I think that's one. But I think from the millennial point of view, in my opinion, there's a lot of them that watched the generation before them or even their grandparents' generation. I guess it depends where they fall, who worked a lot, who made work a priority, who gave it their all for 25, 30, 40 years, and then were so expendable at the end.
Mm.
Like we've gone through a drastic shift where people just, they do lose their jobs, or even if they retire out, they may get a watch and a thank you, but they're not getting a package. They're not being taken care of for life like it used to be, like in our great grandparents' age or whatever, right? So I think a lot of them are saying, no way, heck with that. I'm not giving up my whole life for what? To retire for a few years and then be gone. I just think they're sort of in tune with what some of us missed.
Yeah, which is, I think, hopeful, although I think it's really shaking things up. I can see, daily in the newspaper, you see yet another industry that can't find anyone to work despite raising pay, despite increasing benefits, that sort of thing, because people are just shaken up. And like you said, they don't want to work for the same place, work 60, 80 hours a week for a watch and a handshake.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not worth it.
Yeah,
And
and
so I don't know what's going to happen.
I
Any
don't
predictions
either.
on your part?
No, I mean, I think it's probably different depending on the sector. But I mean, we're in totally different parts of the country, but I bet similarly, you can't walk into a restaurant, a grocery store, a gas station, anything without seeing a sign up that says help wanted. I know that's what it's like here.
It's like that on the West Coast too.
Yeah. And I think, for some jobs, it's a matter of people saying, I can't work for that wage anymore because I can't even sustain my family. And, there's this whole, we won't get into, government supplements and all that. But I just think there's that whole problem of, are people getting paid what they need to get paid to have a decent life, quality of life? But then I do think it's on the other side. It's people wanting more balance, more freedom, more flexibility. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, it feels a little, my husband and I have sort of called it the post-pandemic pandemic.
Yeah.
Because it just feels really uncertain and very unsettled, and nobody knows what's going to happen. And it doesn't seem like it's going in a super great direction on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm heartened by all the things that you said, that people are sort of understanding their worth and their value more, and that their jobs are not the whole thing that they do. It can be a very important part, and one should be happy and satisfied with their work, but it's not the only thing where it used to be.
Yeah.
And so that's heartening. But on the other hand, seeing all of these signs for hiring and seeing businesses, a lot of small businesses, at least in my area, closing because they can't find people to work for them, even despite raising pay and benefits and all of that. So it's really interesting to see. It will be interesting to see what happens and how this shakes out. And I kind of go back, and I can't remember who was running for the Democratic nominee when Joe Biden got that nomination, but I can't remember his name right now. It was New York, and he was asking, his main platform was a basic living wage for everybody. Do you remember who that was by any chance? But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, that I remember people thinking, and even I was thinking, well, that seems a little out there. But now it seems like maybe that's something that needs to happen, or at least be explored or talked about pretty seriously. Because what's happening now, I don't know what it's like on your side of the country. I imagine it's similar. Homelessness is a massive problem. Addiction is a massive, massive problem. And it's not getting better. And it really got worse during the pandemic.
Yeah. And I think there is, on top of all the jobs that are already out there, I mean, you see a lot of layoffs going on and downsizing going on. And I can only imagine some of those conditions you just talked about, they're going to continue to get worse. Yeah, I'm just not sure I don't know where it's going to go. I honestly think there's going to be a little bit of a push and pull for a while, because you see companies now that are sort of trying to force people back into the office, or some type of hybrid situation. And people are trying to sort of pull back and see if they can sort of hold off. It's just, I think it's going to have to all play out. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think this is going to take our new norm is going to be probably 5 years away before we kind of settle in.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I mean, it's interesting. And I like how you had that perspective about everyone sort of had that quiet time that you intentionally took after you separated with that organization that you worked for. And people had it. And again, like you said, it's not necessarily like it was literally quiet, but it was a pause on everything that you've been doing. And so, I mean, I'll ask you this, like, after you had that pause, after you separated from your job, was there any chance in hell you were going to go back to that job?
No. In fact, no. In fact, I do, as I told you, I do work full-time, day job, corporate America, still in the financial services industry. But I have a totally different role, totally different level of responsibility, complete balance in my life. I mean, as complete as you can, right? There's ups and downs, but no, I just can't imagine ever going back to, and not just the place, but just that situation. Let's put it that way. No, I can't.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people are post-pandemic. They have that pause, and they're being asked to go back to whatever it was. And it doesn't mean it was a bad situation. It's just whatever it was that maybe wasn't working for quite a few people. And so here we are. And hopefully people will have the tools like you went out and looked for and used in order to figure out, okay, what is it that I really want to do? How do I really want my life to look? How do I create that balance?
That's a really great point, because truly think people just have to get quiet for a minute and sort of listen, and the more I talk to people, I'll swear by this, the signs are always there. You just said it. And I say it in my story. So looking back, you and I both had many years in between where we didn't do the things we truly loved, or not to the fullest extent. Right. But if you really look back, you said you wanted to be on the radio. In my trailer for the podcast, I talk about listening to AM radio talk shows as a 8-year-old to middle school kid and loving and wishing I could be one.
Mm.
I ran the newspaper in like 4th grade. Like all the things are there. All the signs are there. We just ignore them or they get lost in the busyness of life. So I think people just need to take a moment in that pause or in that quiet time and think about, what are the things they loved when they were in middle school? And if they thought about doing them now, would that light them up? And I bet you most people, the answer is yes.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at the Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to go get a job in that particular field, but there's some way to invite that into your life in some way. And that, I truly believe, has a positive impact in the rest of your life, in your work life, in your family life, in your whatever life. I'm busier than ever doing this podcast, but I get so much joy from doing it that it positively impacts how I interact with people in my day job and I think also with my family. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah. I was going to ask if you thought that was surprising, but yes, because I feel like we become more fulfilled. We feel filled up. We feel excited. We're not feeling, always beat down and like sort of just like life's got a hold of us. Instead, we're sort of mastering that and enjoying it and driving it ourselves. And I think that does change the way you respond to other people, home, work, all of it. I think you become a different person. I think that's true in general. I think it's probably more true because for both of us, we're in that space of trying to be more present, more mindful, more, have more gratitude, all those things, which of course also add to sort of the type of life and the sort of demeanor we're going to have on a daily basis.
Yeah. So getting into that a little bit, what do you do for yourself in either a daily or just a regular practice to be more mindful, more present, more balanced in your life?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I incorporated that are pretty much non-negotiables. Making sure that I take time to call out some points of gratitude every single day, non-negotiable. And some people are like, well, today was a terrible day. I didn't see anything. It can be the smallest thing, right? Like I got out of bed today and things, it felt good. I could walk into the bathroom or whatever it is, but literally it can be that small. But typically there's more than that I can be thankful for. I try to set intention every day in the morning, just kind of set intentions for several things. And I try to reflect at the end of the day. So really be plugged into how the day went, what could have went differently, things that I know I want to set my intentions for tomorrow, that kind of thing. I'd say those are probably top for like daily practices around it. And then of course, learn so many other things that I've incorporated now, like just trying to be more present, learning to be okay with what's going on in the moment versus what I thought would happen, being so in my head all the time. That was a big one for me that, constantly, needs a little bit of tweaking, but really takes a lot of work to get out of the habit of just being so in your head and so tied to trying to plan out what's going to happen and tied to a result versus sort of just letting it play out and know that no matter how it plays out, you'll be good. So those are kind of some of the things. I think the coming out from being under my ego and moving away from external validation, those were all things for me, I think, that have really helped make a difference.
That's huge. I mean, all of it is huge. And, I'm interested in a couple things there. One, I was interested in what kinds of intentions do you set for the day? But then I also was caught with the last thing that you were talking about, moving away from the ego's fascination with external validation. So maybe we could talk about both of those things. What sorts of intentions do you like to set, or that you have found to be the most helpful for you?
So for me, and I do think it's, by person and by what you're going through or what you're trying to sort of level up on. For me, a lot of the intentionality has been focused around being more mindful with my healthy lifestyle that I was trying to create, right? Like I said, I lost a lot of weight. And so trying to set intentions every day to eat as healthy as I can and make good choices, that's important to me. Exercise, important to me, sort of how I'm going to start my day in a positive mood and just, take things as they come. Almost just talking to yourself about what you setting, framing yourself up for the kind of day you want to have. As far as moving away from sort of letting the ego drive, I think that was probably one of the hardest things because, to the point you made earlier, you do get caught up in that, and corporate America is sort of really great at rewarding you, either, the pats on the back or financially or whatever it is. It's very easy to sort of get addicted, I'll say, to
Mhm.
that, all of that. But I think once you take the time to do some of the work and you can be more intentional, you can really be more self aware of those things, those moments. When you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you're stretching, right, and you're uncomfortable and you're trying some new things, you have to sort of shed the fear of being judged. And that's all ego. That's the things you're afraid to do because you're afraid somebody's going to judge you. That's all ego. So I think the more you start doing things and recognizing the pattern, you can sort of stop yourself, take the pause, say, is this really how I want to act? Who's talking here? What's this about? And sort of check in with yourself.
Right. And I mean, I think that point about moving away from the ego is so important because, if we just stay in those places where we get that external validation, those are all really safe places. Nothing wrong with safe places, but we don't really grow. We
Mm,
don't really move anywhere in our lives if we don't kind of go out on the limb every once in a while. And that takes courage. And I definitely I coach some people, and people ask me, well, how do you get courage? And the answer is courage comes from taking the action.
do it.
It is
Mhm.
not something that you get and then you do. It's you do and then you get.
Yeah.
It's that. And so I guess I'm wondering, what kinds of things have you done since that initial courageous step of departing the job that was no longer aligning with you and taking the time to figure things out? What else have you done that has been putting yourself out there that has helped you separate from that ego a little bit?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that comes to mind, and I've talked about this on my show, is the podcast. Because as somebody who was sort of a self-proclaimed perfectionist and, always having to do all the things right and to the highest degree of exceeding expectations, it was very difficult to take the step to say, all right, I'm going to learn a little bit about this and then I'm going to launch. I'm going to just do it and I'm going to do it messy. And doing it messy was so uncomfortable for me. It just was so uncomfortable, scary, uncomfortable, because you don't know. You just don't know all the steps. And that ego driven person is used to being so in my head and so well planned that all the steps. You know everything you're going to do from A to Z. You know all the possibilities of what could go wrong and how you're going to solve them. But what I've learned is you waste so much time and energy on all those what ifs, and they will usually never happen. So it's just wasted energy. And what I now know is you need to look back at your life and realize how much you've gotten through, overcome, worked around, and just know that whatever comes up, you're going to deal with it. And so for me, the podcast, to get back to your question, the podcast was definitely the biggest one. I would say launching the virtual book club on my own was another one. I mean, I had to put an offer out there. I had to say, here's this thing I'm going to deliver. I'm going to charge for people to, say they want to participate. Not a lot, but there's still a cost to entry. And that was hard, right? Because you, of course, have those voices in your head. Everybody will recognize those limiting beliefs, those voices in your head that are telling you, who am I to do this? Who am I to ask for $25 to do this? Or who am I to say that I should be good enough to run this? I haven't done this thing in years. But you are,
Yeah.
you have the skill set. You've been in leadership your whole life. This is my talk to myself, right? You've been in leadership your whole life. You've grown teams. You know how to do this stuff. You're just doing it for yourself now. And so but that was hard.
Well, and it's hard because of all the things that you just said and little gremlins that are talking with you in your head about, who are you and this and that. But it's also hard because it's public. I mean,
Yes.
what you've done is something that is very public. And then, like you said, you're also charging, even if it's a fairly nominal amount, it's still something
Yeah.
that somebody has to pay. And so, it's all of those things. And yet, you were saying that one of your I'm putting the word biggest gremlins that you had, but one of the gremlins that you had was, well, who am I to do this? And I love Marianne Williamson, and I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she says, who are you not to?
Right.
Who are you not to?
That's right. Yes.
And that is such a powerful statement. It's very, I can say that with great ease when I'm looking at you and meaning it for you. It's very hard to turn that on oneself and to really believe it and take that leap of faith anyway.
Yeah. I think, to your point, and to normalize it for people, socialize it, because the reality is, anybody listening, they've gone through similar situations as you and I, right? And doubted themselves in the moment. But it is all about just taking the step. You have to take some action, whatever it is, towards that goal. And then if it doesn't work out, so what? I mean, that's literally what I told myself when I was talking about the podcast. I was like, both things, but the podcast, I was like, so what if I try it? So what if I try it and A, either nobody listens, or B, like somebody tells me it's terrible. Like, I'm not going to die. Like, what's going to happen? Right. You have to have that almost silly conversation with yourself,
Yeah.
but then force yourself to realize this is silly and these gremlins can't get the best of me. Like, let's just do it and take the step, and you're going to learn something from it.
Yeah, regardless. And if there is, I'm going to use air quotes here, failure, you learn something from that too. You learn something about yourself. You learn something about the process, maybe do something differently. And so it's all valuable. And then what if it turns out really great?
Right.
And what
Right.
if you didn't take that step and it was going to be this amazing thing that it ended up being, like your podcast, like your book club, right?
Yeah.
And right now you have a successful podcast. We talked a little bit about that. And so talk a little bit more about what you do on your podcast and what your intentions are going forward with your podcast, and what kind of your theme or your intention with the podcast is.
Yeah. So my vision was to really have this platform that would hopefully inspire, bring hope, and share tips and tools to people that might be going through things. Because, the premise, and I think I said it before, is that life is messy and it's hard and complicated, and it can be beautiful all at the same time. And I think that we're all very similar. Like, you and I are talking, and we've had very similar stories, right? And we don't know each other. We come from different backgrounds. We've had different careers. But really, if you boil it all down, our experiences are pretty close. And that's pretty amazing. And I think it's like that across the board with so many of us. We go through so many things that are shared. And my hope was to provide a platform where we can learn from each other. We can learn from the trials and tribulations and the lessons that people have learned before us. So we can sort of have the cheat sheet or the Cliff Notes version. And then, of course, as you said, I love books. I love all things books, but definitely personal development books. And I think there's a lot of good information there that if you use the books and also talk about the actions to go along with it, because we can read till, the sun goes home, but you have to take some action. So
Mhm.
I think if you join those two things, my goal was to join those two things, to curate the information and then to be able to have a community that we could sort of work together and lean on each other and lift each other up. So that's still my goal.
Yeah, and what I love about your podcast is it's so accessible. It's not like, I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I love podcasts like I love books, and I collect them, and I have them for different moods that I'm
Yeah.
in. And the one thing that I love about your podcast, it's just really accessible. You're not like on some, I don't know, high statue or platform trying to say that you know all of these things. It's really this, like, you really have this beautiful humility about, what you offer on your podcast. And I just think that that's unusual.
Oh,
Um,
thank you for that. Thank you for that. I mean, listen, I said going in, and this was part of mine taking the step and just doing it messy, is I really don't know how to be anybody but me.
mm,
And so I think this is good advice to people, really. And I stole it from somewhere else. I couldn't tell you where, but not everybody's going to love you. You're not going to be the cup of tea for everybody. And that's okay. Like,
right,
that's just okay. If we're not a fit for each other, that's fine. There's 8 zillion others out there, right?
right.
To your point, I collect them too. And I think that, if I can bring people to the table that I can have a genuine conversation with and can offer up information that will help somebody else, why not? Why
Yeah,
not?
and the way that you bring it out, and the way that you speak with others and just speak on the podcast might just be exactly what one or two or three, or hopefully more like thousands of people need. And that maybe somebody else can't hit that mark the way that you do. Like, I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to the Jay Shetty podcast. I'm sure he has a gazillion followers, and he's lovely. And
Yes.
I get a lot from his talks and from his guests. And the one I was listening to today was with Kevin Hart, and who knew, he wrote a book. He's written 2 books, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, something about monsters, but he's talking about gremlins. And I was like, oh, well, somebody else already wrote a book about that. And I was like, it doesn't matter, because it's his voice. It's his message.
Yes.
It's his thing that is connecting with a group of people, probably lots of people, in a way that didn't connect when the other guy or the other woman or the other person wrote it or said it. And that's what's so cool. And that's why, when you took the leap to do the podcast, it's so important. And why I was quoting Marianne Williamson of "Who are you not to?" Because your message might just land where nobody else's will, for a certain set of people, and they need to hear it.
I do think that's true. And I think in all of our lives, I think if you think about certain things you were looking for or trying to figure out, you could have read 10 books, you could have talked to 50 people, but it wasn't until a certain one came along. And it might be because it's the right person. It might be because it's the right time, right? Time, circumstances have a lot to do with it too. But yeah, I do think there's different people connect with different people. I think timings thing, matters, and the type of people you are and you're drawn to matter. It's neat. It's a neat
Yeah.
thing.
So for your podcast, I think you mentioned at somewhere in the neighborhood of 39 episodes so far,
Yeah.
with many more to come. Have you had a couple of favorite guests or topics that just you can't wait to get back to that?
So I wouldn't say that I can't wait to get back to, because they all have common themes going through them. So the topics are, interwoven differently, but it depends on the guest. I would say a couple that stand out for me is I did a interview with someone that she had basically she died many, many times, and she ended up having to have a transplant. And she's just gone on to live this amazing life. And she went back to school to become a doctor so that she could provide counseling for people that were going through life-threatening diseases. And she's just amazing. And so I really loved that episode. I had an episode over the holidays with a counselor, and we were talking about sort of all the holiday drama and how you sort of don't get tied up into the, all the demands and expectations and all of the pulls that I guess we can certainly get caught up in the holidays. And I really loved that episode. She was phenomenal. And we had like just this really great chemistry. So that was fun. And then I did a series on grief. And I have to say, that was really great too, because I talked to lots of different people in that series. So there was a death doula, there was a palliative care doctor, there was somebody that has their own podcast on grief and runs grief counseling groups and had lost his wife. I talked to a woman who lost her child, and she's gone on to she wrote a book, and she's just this really powerful speaker. And
Katie Duke.
yeah. Yes. Yes. And there was another one that I talked to as well. But yeah, and I love her. I love her. Shout out. I love her and all that she's gone through. But what I learned in that series and what I really connected with, and I got a lot of great feedback on, is there's so much grief out there that we don't deal with, right? You don't have to go through a specific loss of a person, though obviously that's a big one. But we do have job loss, and we could lose a house, we could lose a relationship, but we could lose a pet. There's so many things that happen to us from the time we're kids till we're adults, and so many losses that we don't necessarily deal with, and learning to deal with them and really, figure out how to sort of work through that instead of just push it away, I think is really important. And so I really got a lot out of that. So I'm not sure if I could give you an answer because I could probably keep going on and on. I really love them all. I just think it's so fascinating meeting people and talking to people about what they bring to the table. And yeah, I'm doing a series now on aging, dementia, those kind of things. Fascinating. It's just fascinating.
Yeah. Very interesting and a very relevant topic for so many. So I'll be interested to see what you put out there.
Yeah.
Now, you also have your virtual book club.
I do.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So every 6 or 8 weeks or so, we sort of vote on, not sort of, we vote on some books. I put out some ideas out there in the private Facebook community and let folks vote and pick a book and then set up a schedule, and we sort of launch that. And so it's basically mostly independent reading, but there is a framework for, how we chop the book up and how many weeks. And each week I send out an email and talk about the chapters that we read and give them some guidance and some prompts for thinking amongst themselves. And then we all get together at the end and we have a deep dive, and I give a booklet beforehand that sort of frames up some of the topics we'll talk about, and everybody sort of brings their thoughts to the table. And it's just like an old-fashioned book club, except we're not in the same room. We're all virtual, and we talk about it and have a little fun, and it's great. It's a great time. And I think so far been very well received. So we're enjoying it.
Have you had some standout books that you've read in the book club or elsewhere that you'd like to recommend?
So A Year to Live by Stephen Levine was not this one that we just got done, but the previous one. And it was so interesting. It's a very difficult read, and I don't mean difficult like 8,000 pages. It's pretty short, but it is very conceptual, and it is the type of book where you kind of read a chapter sometimes and you have to go, wait, what did that say? And you have to really go back and dig deep to get it. But it was all about the premise of, if you got a prognosis of only having a year to live, what would you do in that year? And what would matter to you in that year? Like, what relationships would you spend time on? And, what do you do in your daily life that you would change? Would you take more risks? What would you want to get done? And there were exercises throughout. And so we did this, and, it really makes you think. It really, really, if you do if you really do it, it makes you really think and come to terms with a lot of things. And there's some exercises in there about revisiting your past and making peace with some things, and being thankful for some things. And it just was a really neat experience. And we had this big discussion at the end if this book should be like required reading for, everybody getting out of college or whatever, some age group. And at the end of the day, we said no, because we thought that they might not be ready. Like, that might be too young to do it. But that was really I'd say one of the favorites. And then this one that we just finished reading, I don't know if I can say this on your podcast, but it's
Oh, I'll say it. Unfuck yourself.
by Gary John Bishop. This is the one we just did, and I'll tell you, this was a fan favorite. So anybody that's sort of wanting to dip their toe into personal development, great book, super short chapters, like 10 pages, super to the point kind of lessons. And he's like just a normal guy, right? Like, he's just a normal guy. He writes like a normal guy. It's not full of swears like you might, a profanity like you might think. There's a couple here or there, but it's not. But really great lessons. And people were absolutely in love with the book, the lessons that it taught. People went out, they sell a calendar, like a daily calendar, which has inspirational quotes from him. And everybody went out after it and bought it. So I would say that's a really great book as well.
I love that too, that it's, like you said, short chapters, because if anyone's like me, I can only read, maybe late at night. And, I've got to sort of get it in the minimal quiet time that I have. And so I like those bite-sized books that I can really get something meaningful from in a very short span of time.
Yeah.
It's either that or I listen to a lot of Audible books. That's new for me this year. Because I have ADHD, I thought that I would have trouble with Audible books because technically where my deficiency is listening and then writing things down, at least when I was tested a gazillion years ago. And I find that I actually retain so much more. And I think this is why I've always been fascinated with radio and podcasts. It's the oral nature and you have to be so present, and it's very intimate, and somebody is right there in your ear. And I actually prefer listening just to the audio and not having the image. I don't want to be distracted by that. I know some people are the other way around, and that's totally cool too. But I love that intimacy that you get as if somebody is sitting right next to you in the car, or on the walk, or on the couch, or somewhere in a coffee shop. And I just love that. And I love it when, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, probably not being a very good host here, but I love when the author themselves reads the book.
I agree.
It just sounds different.
So
you agree? Okay.
I do. And I'm going to say that you should go and get this book, because one of the topics that came up in our wrap-up session was his voice, because I have several people that listen to the Audibles as well, and he has an accent and they loved it.
Ooh,
so
you
should check it out. But yeah, I do think it depends on the person. Yeah. But I do like putting book choices out there that are, smaller in time frame, smaller in size, and then make sure we have enough of a window, because I do like to read, and I read really quickly, but I know there are a lot of people that don't necessarily read it as much. And so I want to make it accessible to everybody. So we do try to pick something that can fit, and most people will be able to get it done in the time frame that we allow. So yeah.
I love that. I know a lot of people, my husband is a very fast reader as well. And I mean, he could read a book, I swear, in an evening. And then I remember having this conversation with him and I was like, but do you hear the words in your head? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I realized, oh, not everybody reads like I do. I literally hear the words as if they're being spoken to me. So no wonder it takes me longer. It's just the way it works. We all are different.
Our brains, our brains work differently. Yeah.
That's amazing. I think I'm going to get those 2 books. Those sound really, really interesting.
I have a big list if you want more, but yeah.
Oh, yes. I would love more. I have no shortage. And I have this stack of books, both on my bedside table, as well as I started hiding them from my husband underneath the bed. He hasn't gone unnoticed, but I do try to hide them under the bed. There's just stacks of them that are.
Well, listen, if you do the audibles, he can't see those. So that's
right.
That's the perfect way.
I listen to him in the car. I annoy my 14, almost 15-year-old in the car, and I listen to him when I walk. I love it. Well, so has there been you mentioned 2 recent books, but has there been like a favorite, like stunner of a book that other than the 2 that you've mentioned that you want to make sure people know about?
I think 2 that I probably think are really good fundamental books if you're looking to make any kind of, and it does depend on what you're looking for, but 2 really general ones are Atomic Habits by James Clear and The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. I think both of those have like fundamental, frameworks in them. One being more about setting up habits and creating new habits and breaking old habits. And the other one more ties into, attitude and how to sort of let it play out and consistency and all that stuff. But really, I think fundamental approaches to trying to make change in your life, whatever kind of change that is. So I'd say those 2. Weight loss, I really, really, really love Chasing Cupcakes by Elizabeth Benton, and then Brain Over Binge by Katherine Hansen.
Okay.
Both
Brain
really.
Over Binge. That sounds like an interesting title. Of course, Chasing Cupcakes does as well.
Well, and the Brain Over Binge one, just so folks hear it right, is it's not just about binging. So it really can be about any kind of addictive behavior. So, kind of just fundamentally super high level concept is we have control over our thoughts, right? They're just thoughts. And this is the fact that, for many years in her life, she was a binger, and she got so many doctors who said, there's something psychologically there and all these things. And then she finally heard from somebody that just said, just stop, stop doing it. You're just because you think it, you don't have to act on it. A thought is not a fact. And I think that fundamental concept, if you kind of think about that and you can put it to use in any kind of addiction or habit you're trying to break, it's really I think it's pretty revolutionary.
Yeah. I mean, certainly all kinds of mindfulness practices espouse that as well, right? That's the whole point, is not to stop thinking, but to become aware of our thoughts and to be disentangled from them.
Yeah. Dr. Amy Johnson, Just a Thought, another great, great, great book. It's all about thoughts are like weather, right? They float in, they float out. You just can't get tied up in them. They're just thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. And, it took me a very, very, very long time, and I still have to practice every day. And still often don't get it right at all. It is a work in progress, which is why mindfulness in the mindfulness realms, they'll call it practice, because it's never perfect. We practice. And it's the practice, it's the act of coming back to the breath or whatever you might be anchoring on. It's coming back to that, which builds the muscle of presence and space between yourself and your thoughts. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's the consistency, right? So just the same thing with trying to build new habits or break habits. It's all about the consistency. And the more you do it, the easier it is to call yourself out when you're not doing it and stop, right? Stop and at least be intentional, because then you can make a decision. And
I love that. I don't know if you've ever seen, I can't remember if it was like the Bob Newhart show. Certainly it was with Bob Newhart, where he played a psychologist. Have you seen
yes.
this scene where he has somebody come into his office? He's like, I have 5 minutes for you. And she's like, 5 minutes, that's all? And he's like, yeah, 5 minutes. And I'm not even sure we're going to, get there. So she starts to say what all her problems is. And he says, well, I have 2 words for you. And she looks at him and is like, what? And he says, just stop, or stop it, or something like that, and he keeps yelling at her every time she says, but I have to stop it. And I know he's making fun of it and simplifying it, but it really is kind of what it comes down to. Right.
Yeah. And again, out of that book that we just read, it's about stopping it, but it's also about being honest with yourself about what you're willing to do. What are you willing to do or not willing to do? Right. You might be, you say you want to lose weight, whatever, but are you willing to quit the treats? Are you willing to, cut back, whatever?
Right. I just had this, to me, it was a revelation. I'm sure to listeners out there, they're like, yeah, no doubt, Melissa. Wow. But, I wanted to develop some healthier habits in the new year, like so many of us want to do every year. And I looked up a bunch of recipes, and I was going to make all these really wonderful foods. And I said, well, I just don't have the time. And so I went, is that really true?
Right.
Or am I making a choice? Now, sometimes it is true. You don't have time for something, or time within the time that something might be offered. That might very well be true. But it's important to examine those stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah. I just interviewed somebody last week. It hasn't aired yet, but she's basically a time strategist, and she coaches people. And that's like one of the core fundamental things is being really honest with yourself and calling yourself out like that and saying exactly what you just did. Like, do I have time? Is that true? What else am I prioritizing over this? Right. So
Just getting honest with oneself about what our priorities are. And it's not easy. I don't say that lightly. It's easy to say, but difficult to sometimes bite off that reality of ourselves that, oh, I am making a choice here.
Yeah. And I think the trick is to do it with no judgment, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Do it with curiosity and compassion. So it's just to have an understanding. It's not necessarily to judge yourself.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, this has been such an incredible conversation. I wonder if we might end here. We'll see how this question lands for you. So when you look back at the young woman who was pregnant and had hopes and dreams about journalism and creativity and all of that, and making a different choice and doing the thing that was right at the time, right? Going after the job in finance. With all that you've learned since jumping off the ledge and taking the leap of faith and delving into that quiet time and kind of reconfiguring your life, what would you tell her?
Oh, there's a couple of things I would tell her. I think the biggest thing would be to trust yourself, that you've got what it takes, and you'll get whatever, you will make whatever needs to happen. But I also think I would love her to write down all the things she loves and hoped, and make her revisit that on a regular basis and really sit with that. I don't know if it's once a year, every 3 years, whatever, but in some time period, so that 40 years don't go by, right? I'm 53 now, but so a big chunk of time doesn't go by and you sort of lose track of that. I would like to have that somewhere on a piece of paper framed up, that's something that you just have to be very in touch with, and remind her of that all the time.
What a beautiful way to end there, because I think we could all do that even now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is important to us? What lights us up? Revisit that regularly. And even if it's not something that is realistic at the time to have in our life, just by having that reminder of who we really are and what lights us up, what feeds our souls, that can get us through some difficult times. It also gives us something to look forward to, connects us with it, and we don't lose sight of it, and we keep it ever present. And yeah, I love that.
Me too. I wish I did it.
Well, you can now, right?
Absolutely.
At the young age of 53, you can do it now so that your 75-year-old self has that. Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's our message.
That's our message. Well, speaking of which, I will certainly put it in the show notes, but if some people are just listening and they are like me and they love Audible types of things, where can they find you and all the good work that you're doing?
Yeah. So messageinthemiddle.com. That's the website. You can get links there and listen to all the podcasts. You can find out about the book clubs and some other things we have going on. And the podcast can be found on any platform that you listen to podcasts. It's out there for all the major and most of the minor. So yeah, that's us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marianne. It's been such a pleasure to have you. And I'm like, how do I join your book club? So I'm going to take a look at that. Hopefully other listeners will too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been great.
Hey, everybody. If you like this conversation, make sure to rate the show in Apple or Spotify or wherever you are listening so that others can find it and enjoy it too. And if you like the show and want to keep hearing great conversations with really interesting people about how they found their purpose, please donate to the show. Go to thefullymindful.com to donate today. Hey, everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.